That's a good beginning. Thank you. I thought I was a piece of wood here, but I wasn't. So anyhow, thank you very much. Let's put it over here. My name is John Ackerlin, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm very enthusiastic about this program, and very grateful for this way of life. It's terrific. Can you hear me back there? No. All right. My name is John Ackerlin, and I'm an alcoholic. All right. This is kind of a little hard in the beginning for me because it's overwhelming. First, I'd like to thank the committee here for the invitation, Dave, and I really appreciate this invitation. And I'd like to thank Marge and Lorraine and Wayne for being our hosts here and picking us up at the airport and made us feel so home here. And thank you very much. You know, I have a lot of friends in this room that I love very much. You know, and it touched me deeply. I ran here from Yellowknife in Northwest Territory. We came all the way from there down here, and there's another family from up there, and so it really makes me very emotional, you know, to see all these friends that we have seen before. And you have never seen me before. In a very short while you will know me very intimately. And that's just one of the neat things that happens in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, that we can know each other on that level. I certainly enjoyed Ken last night. He sure is generous with himself. Such a tragic thing, and he makes so much fun of himself, and I've known him for years, and he's really a wonderful AA. And the other people that participated here this week, and if I screw up tonight, Mildred and Karen will save you in the morning. You know, I hope you show up here. You know, I love Canada. You know, I was involved in the institutional committee. That was my deal for many, many years. And then you don't know this, but you are looking at the most famous substitute speaker in AA on the West Coast. When there's real speakers had two engagements in the same week, and they made a pick, and they said, well, let us send John over there. And the first time I was in a big convention like this was in Vancouver. There was 4,500 people. And Corky Berg, who was my host, picked me up at the airport. And we stood in this hotel. All these people were milling around, and this lady came up to him and said, hi, how are you? And he said, fine, honey, how are you? And she said, you don't remember me, do you? And he said, sure, honey, but I'm rather busy with this gentleman right now. I said, Corky, she wants to talk to you. I mean, I'm doing fine. Everybody are friendly. So he left, and he came back 10 minutes later. He said, that's the damnedest thing I ever gone through in my life. I said, what happened to you? He said, came up, and she said, you don't remember me, do you? And he said, sure, honey. What meeting did I meet you at? He said, she said, for God's sake, man, I was your second wife. You know. It's a little black out there. Second time I was invited to Reno, Nevada. Tom Breen from Canada was going to be the banquet speaker. And sometimes Tommy ate 2 lunches and 2 dinners. And when he came on the plane, he had a heart attack. And so they carried him off the plane, and then when they carried him off the plane, they said, call Norm Alpy and ask him to substitute for me, you know. So they called Norm Alpy and said, will you substitute for Tom in Reno? And he said, I'm not substitute speaker, call Ackerlin, you know. So that was my second time. I sat next to the Secretary General of Nevada there. He's the governor now, and he was trying to make small talks with me. And he said, you know, I know this judge in Los Angeles, a very famous judge in AA. He said, do you know him? And I said, yeah, he threw up on me in Palm Springs Roundup. Said, I know him very intimately, you know. And so anyhow, I have been around for a while, and I love the circle: recovery, unity, and service. It's a fabulous thing. Many people. This daily reprieve continuing to our spiritual conditioning. You know, I couldn't find a finer thing that you could set up there. Really very thoughtful. All right. Can you hear me now back there? Well, anyhow, I know it's irritating to sit in a space and you don't hear anything for an hour, you know, and so I'm trying to stay right on the mic here, you know. So I don't want you to miss out on anything, you know. I don't think I'm too presumptuous if I say that some of us here tonight sit with a bunch of burdens and lots of if onlys. But be that as it may, we are here in this room are still the lucky ones because we have a chance. Lots of people who have this thing called alcoholism doesn't have a chance, and for various reasons. For the record, my grandfather died from alcoholic delirium. 1910, he lived in a 2,000-acre place outside Stockholm, but that's what happened to him. My father had a problem with his liver in 1927, and nobody knew anything about this illness then. He was a giant of a man. He radiated vitality. Women adored him and men envied him, but he died 3 years later, and he only weighed 130 pounds when he died, and he didn't want to die at all, and he didn't have much of a chance. I was 8 years old then, and it is something to see a beautiful human being like he once was, because he was 6'2", and when he touched you, you realize his strength. But in 3 years, he had deteriorated to absolutely nothingness. My father was an aristocrat. He was very vain and proud and arrogant. But he was also a very loving person. But there wasn't violence. And thanks to our program, I have been able to forgive him for that violence. And it's an important point. 99 out of 100 meetings I go to, we finish with the Lord's Prayer. And there's a line that says, forgiven as I forgive those who trespass against me. And I can assure you that I was stuff in my inventory I wish I could be forgiven about. And then we can't have two standards here. I'm supposed to be forgiven. I'm supposed to have an opportunity for a new life. But anybody that did something to me, justice for them or whatever you want to call it, it's an important point. Because if we don't take care of this issue, we will come in as victims, and we will remain victims, and it will interfere in our own recovery. And that's why I bring up that point. My older brother didn't have much of a chance for another reason. He had a little bit of pride, and it seems to be a commodity that we can't afford a luxury in this outfit. 20 years ago now, he lived in a castle outside Stockholm. He was married to a very beautiful girl. In fact, he married my girlfriend. I had a little bit of problem with that for a while. But now I'm glad he did. But he drank like I drank, and he blew it all. For 18 years he defended his right to drink. It is something to see this insidious denial that some of us have. You know, this guy earned 150 grand a year, spoke 6 languages fluently, carried a Swedish flag in the Olympics on 3 occasions. For 18 years he lived in a room that cost $15 a month to live in, and drank a fifth of whiskey every day and just lived in the past. And there was nothing ever wrong with him. I tried to 12-step him a few times. His drunkalog and mine was very similar. I wrote him a letter, 1.5 pages what I used to be like, and 3.5 pages about all the wonders that has happened to me since I joined the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a postcard back. Said, "Dear John, I'm sorry to hear about all your problems." I mean, so much for identification. I flew to Stockholm in 1978 and spent a couple of weeks with him. I invited him out here. He was here with me for a month. I took him to AA meetings. He died 11 years ago from yellow yonders. My younger brother has gone through scripts in La Jolla twice. First time 17 years ago, and they told him there that he couldn't drink alcohol anymore. There was something really wrong with his liver, and he shouldn't drink booze anymore. They told him that for 90 days. But he doesn't drink the way I did, and that's all he's looking at. He kind of have 6, 7 whiskeys before dinner, 2 kinds of wine, coffee and brandy for dessert. It's kind of elegant. Sometimes it's candlelight dining, you know. It's really bullshit, the whole deal, you know what I mean? He's still drinking. You know, this alcoholic attitude. I mean, like a guy that drove his Corvette, you know, 140 miles an hour down the road, rolled it 6 times, came up on the other side and said, "Never again am I going to buy a goddamn Chevy," you know. You know. You and I, we wonder something. What's wrong with people like my brothers, or people with that attitude? There ain't nothing wrong with them. Alcohol did something for my older brother to the day he died. It's still doing something for my younger brother. And that's the nature of the illness. And that's why I said in the beginning that you and I are the lucky ones because we have a chance. Because of the evidences in these rooms that people like you and I, the way we drank and carried on, we can change and live without it and have fabulous lives. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is all about. How to live good out there without it. And I know it's a daily reprieve, you know, but it helps me. I made a commitment to sobriety no matter what, but I live a day at a time. And these 12 steps in this program for living is for sober people. I mean, if you just want to stop drinking, you can kick a cop in the ass. You know, you stop for 30 days at least, you know. I don't know how it came on to me there. My wife told me I have to tone it down a little bit, you know. Saw a bunch of Mormons out here this afternoon, you know. You know, I talk to newcomers. I love the feelings in these rooms when there are newcomers, and I like being a newcomer myself. It's very important to me. And I like to share with you why I like to be a newcomer. I hope I never forget the last year I drank, because I compromised on everything I believed in and stood for. I couldn't live or function without liquor. I didn't dare to go to sleep if I didn't have a fifth of whiskey in the refrigerator, because I had to have it when I woke up. And if I ran out of booze at midnight, I usually called an associate of mine in Baldwin Park and said, "Hal, next week you will owe me $150 on this particular job. But if you give me $20 tonight, you won't have to pay me the $130 next week." And I drove a 100-mile round trip at midnight to pick up $20. I didn't dare to buy any booze in Beaumont Park because then I wouldn't make it home. And when I came home to Anaheim, where we lived at the time, I bought a fifth of Imperial Bourbon for $4.85. And then I was safe, and I had to live like that, and I hope I never forget that period in my life. I know some of us, after we get a little well, get a few dollars in our pockets and bedroom privileges again. Forget how it really was. In fact, Karen cut me off 6 months before I came into AA. You know, she really ran out of humor at the end, I tell you. She stood down and looked at me one evening and said, "John, I wish you could find yourself a girlfriend so I wouldn't have to fool with you." She said, "You take forever." After sobriety, if you take forever, it's very commendable. Let's face it, it ain't fair at all there, you know. The other reason why I like to be a newcomer, I'd been going to meetings every day for 90 days. And Phil Petty talked one Sunday morning, and he stood up here and said, if you keep going to meetings, you will wake up one morning and realize and find out that you can function without alcohol. And it is not necessary to drink anymore, and you have a way to go. And I sat in that room and I said, my God, I've experienced those feelings. And it was the first time here it dawned on me that I wasn't hooked anymore, that I had some degree of choice over my own actions. And I'd already started to experience the freedom here that I hadn't had for a long, long time. And I hope I never forget that period in Alcoholics Anonymous. The knowledge that I wasn't hooked and that I was free, I hope I never take it for granted. Those are the two reasons why I like to be a newcomer. I still didn't start to drink until I was 31 years old. It doesn't sound so promising right now, but that's how it was. But I'll share with you how I was when I was young. First of all, the reason why I didn't drink when I was young. When my father died, I promised my grandmother I was never going to drink, so I didn't drink. When I was 19 years old, I had gone to college a year. The war broke out. I went in the Air Force for 2.5 years. And after that, I went back to college for 1.5 years, and I was selling at night, and I was trying to help my mom. It was very important to me to play the man of the house part because my older brother was different. He was brilliant in school. He had scholarships to universities, and everything was mapped out for him. But I was different, and I could never figure him and me out in the first place. You know, this fella, he never opened a book. He had A's in everything. I could study till 1 in the morning. I still failed. It really bothered me. Fuck it, it's still bothering me. You know, I'm very willing. I try real hard. I can be good for a short time. But when the bottom fell out or something negative happened, I couldn't figure out what was such a screw-up. When I was young, I had an unbelievable inferiority complex. I'm a perfectionist on top of it. That's not a good combination. I contemplated suicide a lot when I was young because of my father. I knew if I died, I would be my father. And you see, when he lived, that was security, prestige, and respect, and those things. And I tell you what I did when I was young. I just faked it. I pretended I was really together. I was very noisy and opinionated. And that gave me some false courage, and that's how I was when I was young. When I was 31 years old, I was employed by this door factory in Alhambra. My boss was alcoholic, and he taught me how to drink every day. And a new life began for me, you know. It was an incredible affair, you know. We drank early times at 8 o'clock in the morning, cocktails at 10. Martini lunches from 12 to 2:30. Made a couple of calls in the afternoon and went back to the office and typed up bits from 6 to midnight, drank whiskey. And I thought I landed in heaven. Now, I used to come home to Karen and say, you know, this building business is out of this world. I never felt so good in my life, you know. You know that, in retrospect, I drank a fifth of booze a day from day one. For 2 years, I was never drunk, never hungover. I just felt good. And there's something wrong with your system where you can drink that much liquor. You know, I had an enormous capacity, and I mean that's one of the side, but I mean, I didn't have no idea about it. And emotionally what alcohol did for me. You know, when I was 13, 14 years old, my mother started to send me to a psychiatrist. I had a real problem with my father dying so soon, and I started to play games like if I was a good kid, he was going to come back to me as a reward. And I lived in those illusions and fantasies for many years, you know. And when I started to drink alcohol, like that had never happened. The sky was the limit. I couldn't miss. It was an unbelievable vehicle for me, you know. And I tell you, I was suicidal for many, many years. And I tell you, many times alcohol saved me from committing suicide, you know. And so that's how it was. A year later, I owned a place. I had sold so many doors they couldn't pay me my commission. So they gave me 1/3 of the stock of the company. And I was a success story. And it was an incredible time of my life, you know. We came over here, you know, in 1948, and a few years later I was part owner of a door factory. It was quite an achievement, you know, and it was a wonderful time of my life, you know. And I have never been afraid of working, you know. But when you own a place, you're general manager, sales manager, which I was. But I was also the truck driver. I delivered all the doors I sold. And I used to work 16, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I loved every minute of it. And what I'm going to give you now is the highlight of my drinking career. You know, I had landed a big contract with American Housing Guild in San Diego, several $100,000 worth of door openings. And we lived in Corona del Mar at the time. It's a little town down on the coast in Southern California, 6 miles from where we live now. And I used to work all day long up in Alhambra where we have our little door factory, pre-fitting doors and loading this 2.5-ton truck we had. And I came home to Corona del Mar 3:30 in the morning, you know, with this big truck, and came into our little house down the bluff, and Karen had a hot bath ready for me, and I slid in the tub down, lit a candle and inhaled, you know, and she laid back there, you know. And she came in with a pitch of martinis and sat down and drank martinis with me. 3:30 in the morning, it's really living, you know. And I lay down in that tub and I smoked that camel and I drank the martini and I spit it out the pimento, you know. You know, and then I usually said, you know, I'm just a little immigrant and I own the goddamn place. You know. A few years later, they fired me from my own door factory, you know. We have 3 beautiful girls and a son, and we took them to church on Sundays. We did everything right to be Americans. The only problem with that church business was the last 4 years I was a morning drinker. She usually inspected me before we should leave, and many times she just looked at me and said, not today. Hurt my feelings when she took off down the street with the kids in the car, and I had her stand there in the corner of the home, so sometimes I ran down the block after her, screaming and hollering, you know, and my neighbors were outside talking about the lawn problem, and here I came running by, you know. Sometimes I was strangely clad. She saw me in the rearview mirror coming after her in my pajamas, you know. So she stopped down the block and waited for me and rolled down the window and said, what's the matter now, you know? And so don't forget to pray for me, you know. When I got there, I didn't feel like I belonged, but Jesus, I tried, you know. I sat down, looked sincere, and hummed a lot, you know. I could take the sermon 20 minutes max, and then I had to have a drink. 20 minutes into his talk, I just got up and said, oh, screw them all, you know what I mean. And then I went home and I drank scotch those days and played good music and became very spiritual. Played Stan Getz and Dave Brubeck and La Boheme and Coleman Hawkins and big bands, you know. That was what I played then. And now in sobriety, I even played Pink Floyd and Brian Ferry. I don't know, but that. A couple of years later, it had progressed a little bit. One week she says to me, let us try the Episcopalian church next Sunday because the congregation certainly doesn't do the job. And I said, it sounds terrific. And Said, yeah, they have very colorful costumes down there, and they sing a lot, and you like music, it might hit you. I had been drinking till 5 that morning. I still had the shakes when I woke up. I went out in the kitchen and drank a little codeine cough medicine and 2 shots of whiskey to stop the shakes, and tightened my belt and walked around with small steps and tried to look effective. Passed inspection and came to church. The only thing I can say to you, the routine in the Episcopalian church, it really ain't for drunks. It's a very busy place, you know. I mean, they get up and down and kneel and pray and sit and stand and sing. I was up and down 3-4 times, then my timing got off, you know. When they sat down, I stood up, you know. In Sweden, when we don't know the words, we sing tra-la-la. I had a couple of solos there all by myself, you know. In fact, the second time I came up there and gave the little deal, there was a guy 5 rows behind me, said, sit down, you son of a bitch, he said. Third time down praying, I couldn't get up again, you know. I clung to that bench. I tried every trick in the book I knew to get up and couldn't make it. Tried it sideways and backwards and forward. I even tried to roll up. And she sat down and looked at me and she said, for God's sake, Johnny, get up. I said, it's an absolute impossibility, you know. So they went up and down and I sat down and sang by myself, you know. Next time I looked behind me, they all down praying, and here's this guy in the row behind me laying down his knees with his chin in his hand, and he mumbled and looked real serious. And he looked right at me. And I sat down on the floor and stared at him. You know, sometimes you look at the guy, you focus in and you lock and you can't move, you know. So he stared at me and I stared at him, and then I thought I better look a little casual, so I winked my eye to him. Kind of stopped him for a minute. So we didn't go back to the Episcopalian church anymore, you know. You know, I really never had problem with my liquor until I tried to stop drinking. When I started to try to stop drinking, I got into trouble with my drinking. One week, Karen says to me, he said, you drink too much. I said, what are you talking about? She said, Johnny, you drink way too much booze. So I said, then I'll quit. And then I couldn't quit. And that's when it all began. Because when I had been off the sauce for a couple of days, I got the shakes. And then 2 shots of whiskey stopped the shakes, I could function and work. So then I had to con myself into I had to have a couple of drinks all the time. And then I lied about it, and then I was hiding, and from then on it got worse. When I was into 2-3 years of my drinking, I was up to 2/5 of whiskey a day. The last year I drank, the last 10 months I drank, it didn't matter if I drank a pint or 3/5 of whiskey a day. I also drank 2 bottles of codeine cough medicine every day, and 6 anisins 4 times a day, and I was absolutely weird. Those 10 months I couldn't get drunk and I couldn't get sober, and the guilt was on all the time, and there was no relief, and I just thought I was going crazy, and I probably was. And this is a terrifying time in our life because we can't tell nobody. I was just worried about that they were going to find out and see how I lived and carried on, and I knew they were just going to put me away somewhere. And sometimes you and I, we talk about the alcoholic loneliness. And as far as I'm concerned, I ain't nothing like it, because it is a total isolation. And we drink to live, and we know we are dying, there's no way out of it, and that's how it is. 2 years after the shakes began, weirder things happened to me when I stopped drinking. One morning at 4 o'clock, I sat straight up in my bed and looked in front of me, and this big white snake came out of the wall. You know, I never saw anything like it in my life. It was unbelievable. He came right out of the wall. He was snow white, had 3 black eyes. He was this big in diameter, and his fattest part, he was 23 feet long. And he came slowly across the room, stopped right in front of my face, and started to hiss at me. Like this, tongue dangling. I couldn't even smell him. Kind of a paraldehyde, sweet mocha deal. The whole thing was incredible. And I sat down and said to myself, you know, I haven't had a drink for 3 days, so it can't be the booze. You know? The closer he came, the more I screamed. And the noise in my head from my own screams reached such a crescendo, it was eventually like my brain exploded from my own screams. It finally just said, pew! And then I blacked out and fell backwards. That was my experience with it. Karen told me in the morning, she said, something strange happened this morning around 4 o'clock. She said, you sat straight up, looked in front of you for quite a while, and then you said, ee. One morning she almost had me. Oh, shit. I woke up and my bed was wet. It was the most humiliating time in my drinking career. I lay down and I thought, that's finally happened. What can I say to this, you know? And she was standing there in front of the bed and looking at me with those cold Allen on ice, you know, those little bitty ones, you know. But the dialogue was terrific. She stood down, looked at me, and she said, well? Well, what? I mean, what the hell can you say? God, I hope there's some bedwetters here tonight, you know. That moment, my youngest daughter, Katrina, came in, and she said, oh, Daddy, I'm so sorry, but last night when I climbed into bed with you, I believed I wet your bed. I mean, talk about the break for an alcoholic. You know what I mean? I just smiled at her. I said, my darling, I said, a little squirt now and then won't hurt anybody. I said, and you thought I was alcoholic, you know. 4 days later, it wasn't Katrina's fault. I didn't have a dream. I went to the bathroom. I didn't have a blackout. I just laid on reason. I said, to hell with it. If she can do it, I can do it, you know. One night I made love to her when she wasn't even there. That's kind of tricky. She was actually laying 2 feet away from me there, and she said, what are you doing over there? And I said, I beg your pardon, you know. I mean, I always had a lot of class, you know. When she realized what was going on, she started to laugh at me. I started to cry because I felt it was so humiliating to laugh at the guy who was doing his best. In the morning, I had been out in the kitchen. I'd had my codeine and cough medicine and my whiskey. She met me in the hallway. She smiled at me and said, well, good morning, lover boy. And, I didn't feel any pain. I just smiled at her. I said, that's the best peace I've had in a long time. So it goes. Needless to say, I love laughter in Alcoholics Anonymous. To me, that in itself is a spiritual experience. To me, it is very much part of the recovery program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Anything that you and I have laughed a little bit about here this evening was absolutely the deepest tragedy when it happened. But when you and I, in this manner of identification, this insanity and this denial, can just laugh about the whole mess, it makes it possible for us to forgive ourselves and change. And it is very much part of the recovery program of Alcoholics Anonymous. We started over many times, and every time I had the best of intention, and every time it got worse. And you do that when you have 4 kids. And you know, Karen says, you know, Johnny, I want a divorce. Please, hold on for 90 days. You know, I'm finishing these jobs, and if you wait for 90 days, these jobs are finished. I give you the best attorney there is, and I don't blame you, and you know, and you get more money then. And so hold off for 90 days. And she did that several times when we were debating this. But you know, it is a tragedy at the end there. You know, my one time I made a commitment. I said, well, let us go to Palm Springs in 3 weeks and have a vacation, all of us, you know. And I tell you, that time in my life, I hadn't been out of town for 9 years. For 5 years. I didn't have to leave. I was safe there. They took my checks. They weren't always good. But I had a charge account at the liquor store, so I always got what I needed as far as booze was concerned. And that morning we should go to Palm Springs. I was absolutely panic-stricken. I said, what's going to happen to me over there, you know? And I drank a fifth of whiskey and drove to 80, 90 miles an hour to Palm Springs. The kids were crying. She was hysterical. And I had to get all well it lasted. And Karen was convinced that it was my way of telling her I didn't love her and wanted out of it and didn't know how to say it. And the second day there, she just locked herself in the bathroom and drank 100 aspirins and said, Johnny, I just can't live like this any longer. I have to commit suicide. And I laid on that bed and prayed to God, hoping she would die so she wouldn't have to be with me anymore. Because I knew at that time of my life there was no way out of it for me because I really tried. And so it is. You know, 2 years after that incident, I came into AA. And you can draw your own conclusion how those 2 years were and my guilt connected with it. It was the same year they fired me from my door factory. You should have seen my attitude about that. I mean, this is my means of income. And when they said sign off, I just signed off. I said, who needs this headache anyhow? Now I can just drink and be happy. That's how it is. He'll take everything in the near and dear to us before we are willing to throw in the towel or try something else. You know. And I give you one more deal about how alcoholism is, you know, at that stage of our life, you know. You know, I couldn't answer the phone at that time without having a drink, you know. I used to say I have to go down to the market and buy a loaf of bread and a fifth of milk, you know. Everything, you know, I got so drunk one night there, you know, and I said to her, and she came to me and said, Johnny, do you do this to drive me crazy and don't you love me at all anymore? And I said, I thought it was the other way around. I thought you didn't love me. So we started to talk to each other. We talked for a whole hour. And you know, when we went to bed after an hour, we were two like both happy kids, and we knew everything was going to be all right, and she still loved me. Next morning, she waved goodbye to me. 8 o'clock in the morning, I should go to work, and I drove away from my home there. I said, she still loves me, it's going to be all right. About 9:30, my shakes began. And I had to go in and negotiate the contract with a big developer named Teach Construction and for 110 houses in Oceanside. And I couldn't go into him shaking like I was. So I went into my bar and had 2 double shots of whiskey and steady as a rock. And went in out to that big company's office and negotiated a contract for $300,000 worth of work. I was in frames and jams and doors and waters and finished lumber, and I installed it all in a big track level, you know, and that was my business. And I negotiated that contract. 45 minutes it took, and then I came out of there, and then it began again, you know, and I mean, then I had no idea what this is all about, but the compulsion is there, and I just had to go in and drink again, and I drank all afternoon and came home down to my house with this $300,000 contract. And she met me at the front door, tears rolling down her cheeks, and said, I knew you didn't mean it. And that's alcoholism. Thank God for Al-Anon. Last episode before I came into AA, it was a Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. I got picked up at Thrifty Mart trying to steal a pint of liquor for $3.57. You should have seen me that morning. I was drunken and shaven. I weighed 246 pounds. I couldn't even defend myself. I just stood on and whimpered, it can't be me. Look where I came from. And I was brought up in a beautiful family in the most favorable circumstances. But I tell you, that morning in Anaheim, I looked exactly like a person who has to steal a pint of liquor to live. You know. 4 years before I came to AA, I made serious efforts to stop drinking. You know, I had 13 years, 2 hours a day religious education. I swore on the Bible one time in front of my wife and kids. I said, I swear to God I never drink again. And I said, you know, I've never broken my word of honor to you. And she said at the time, you know, Sheila, your father never has. And I thought, if I use this thing that means so much, maybe I can stop. 2 weeks later, I find myself drunk again. I went to a minister for counseling for 18 months every week for an hour, and I leveled with him. And he told me one time, he said, JohnA, you have to ask God to help you. I said, Walter, you are a good man. I'm not. You don't talk to your wife the way I talk to mine in the evenings when she bugs me about my drink, because God doesn't want to have anything to do with me. I've tried that stuff. And he read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find out how he could best help me, and he realized through the book of hours that him and I relaxed identification, and that I had to find my bottom further down alone. He even suggested a program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no idea what he meant, Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no idea. So when he wouldn't talk to me anymore, I went to a marriage counselor, a psychologist in Santa Ana. I spent $2,000 with this doctor. There wasn't anything he said to me that my wife didn't tell me for free 3 times a day, you know. There wasn't anything he said to me either that wasn't the truth. Everything he said was the truth. One time he stood down and looked at me and said, you know, John, what's wrong with you? And I said, please tell me, Doc. And he told it all my secrets and all my emotional problems. And I said, Doctor, you're absolutely right. And that's why I drink, because I can't stand myself the way I'm put together either. So then he laid on me, I hurt my wife and my kids were in my deal. So what do you do then? You do what I did. I went on the wagon. And the tragedy with that stuff at this stage of the deal is simply this, that the more sober we become, the more we realize how we hurt our loved ones. And that in itself drives us back to drinking again, because that's the only way we know to get out from under the guilt. And that's so it is. There's a lot of capable people in the field of alcoholism today, but I sure don't envy them, because the nature of the illness is still the same today as when I came in. As long as alcohol is doing something for us, it is impossible for anybody talking out of using it. And that's the nature of the illness. And that's why I said in the beginning that you and I are the lucky ones because of the evidences in these rooms. The last effort I did before I came into AA was the last Christmas I drank. I came home down in the beginning of December. I said, you know, if I only had a dapple gray Arabian horse, I think I could stop drinking, you know. She looked a little strange, to say the least. Bought this beautiful dapple gray Arabian horse. He was 3.5 years old. We had to look the picture. It was always important to me how I looked. I went up to the London shop and bought my outfit in Beverly Hills. A beautiful Stetson hat and a Harris tweed jacket and English yard purse, a Spanish cane, and I wore my father's monocle. Looked good. The horse had a beautiful English saddle, a Kimberwick bit, special reins and stirrups, a martingale was very important. You know, I was sober with this deal for a day and a half. Then I had 14 martinis for lunch and fell off the horse too, you know. And so here I tried all these profound things to get sober. And then came that last ultimatum when Karen says to me, you know, Johnny, for years, because of the children we have stayed together. But now because of them we have to part. And either you go down and try that thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, or else you have to leave again. And that's how I came in. And I just went down to that Alona Club in Anaheim because I didn't want to be kicked out again. I came in down at 8 o'clock in the morning, and Josephine behind the counter said, do you have a drinking problem? I said, no. Get along as famously with it. Can you do something for my wife? She's crazy, you know. And that's how it is when we come in here. And we don't know it's going to work, and we got to cover our own bases. I tell you another thing. If I had known how sick I was when I came in, I would never have stayed. Stopping drinking wouldn't have fixed that. And I think this is one of the most merciful things that God has in store for us here. You know, many of us, if you and I had known precisely how bad it is, how we are when we come in, many of us would do something much more drastic. And there's a line that covers it in Big Book. It says, more will be revealed and thank God. Now you see, when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, as bad as it was, alcohol had been my solution for so long And we so slowly and so gradually go into our relationship to liquor, it's impossible for us to see while we are in a relationship to liquor and admit it, because for a long time it worked. And that's what we are shooting for. That's the incentive. It might work like it used to. And that's the ism for us. And by the grace of God, and the next day it all happened to me here. I woke up in the morning, went out in the kitchen and drank a little codeine, cough medicine, and 2 shots of whiskey and brushed my teeth. Drove down to the Alona Club in Anaheim and polished off a pint of Seagan 7 on my way down there, and came in down and asked them to call my wife and tell her I was there already. And then I stood on bullshit a little bit, and I mean, for God's sake, how can I be an alcoholic? I have a beautiful home with a swimming pool, 3 automobiles, and an English bulldog, play a little music and dream and fantasize a little bit. I mean, that certainly ain't alcoholism. And then I went out and had 4 double martinis for lunch and came back and asked them to call her again, say out there was second time to show how sincere I was. And then I should go home and buy a 5th and say I'd been to AA 3 times that day. And there's this guy standing at the coffee bar, and he stood down and looked at me and he said, Johnny, why don't you come home with me and let us talk? I said, okay. And we sat in his patio, and he told me his story. And that's what I think is important in Alcoholics Anonymous. One drunk talking to another, and the identification between the two. And when he was true, I realized he was worse than I was, and he depended more than I did. And he was sober. I said, you were that bad and you can stay off the sauce? And he said, yes. And I knew he was telling the truth. But I tried to wiggle out of it one more time. I said, Charlie, you don't understand. Every time I stop drinking, I get the shakes, and weird things happens to me when I stop drinking. And he said, Johnny, you will only shake for 4 or 5 days. Then you never have to shake again as long as you live. And I didn't know that. I sat down and I thought, what information this guy is coming up with here, Then he told me about the disease of alcoholism. He called it an allergy of the body coupled with the obsession of the mind. And he said the first drink is a mental one to make you comfortable. And then the body takes over and craves more booze, and you cannot control your drinking pattern or your behavior pattern. So things started to make a little bit of sense to me that afternoon. I was in a meeting that night, and when they read a short portion of chapter 5 that we heard here this evening, I just said, please God help me today to stay sober. And it wasn't a big deal. I always thought the spiritual experience would be something like, kaboom, yes, John, what can I do for you? But it wasn't like that at all. It was merely a feeling, and my thoughts were these, that perhaps after all this dies away from me too. When I came home that night, I said to Karen, I said, it happened to me tonight. I don't have to drink anymore. And she said, your eyes look different. I haven't had to drink alcohol or any codeine, cough medicine, or strange pills or funny cigarettes since that day, and today it's 32 years ago. And you all knew, you might sit down and say to yourself that it must be easy for you, have all that time in the program. But it wasn't easy then, and that's what we are dealing with right now. I was not a great success when I came in here. I had a lot of anxieties about my kids. I wanted to be a good father. I knew I wasn't most of the time. I was $36,000 in the hole, and they were all small bills and all due. And Karen's suicide attempt just about drove me crazy. It's very hard to live with yourself when you realize that you're a broken another human being spirit. But I didn't drink, and I went to meetings. And that's all I had going for me for quite a while. But I just like to tell you who are new here. Those first 2 months of my sobriety, I had the most unbelievable fears. I couldn't handle nothing. When the phone rang at home, I just pointed at it. I said, and I just split and hid in my closet. I sat down on the floor in my closet and just wept. I was scared to death of those phone calls. I had about 10 days of sobriety. I sat in the front row in the stag meeting and blurted out. I said, you guys don't understand, but I feel so damn guilty. And that was an old-timer said, the reason you feel so guilty is because you're guilty. And there were guys like that that saved my life. For the first time I could admit it was my fault without reservations. You know, as long as we pin it on somebody else or something else, nothing can happen to us. But I just came to the conclusion whatever they had done or she had done or said, I drove them to it. And when I took it on that basis, I was free. But when that meeting closed that night, it was probably the most crucial time for me here because I felt trapped. I felt I was in a corner I couldn't get out of. I actually regretted that I had copped out and admitted it was my fault. The only thing I had going for me here then was this, that I knew under no circumstances could I go back to drinking again. No matter what, I couldn't escape to booze anymore. I had done enough damage. I had no more rights when it came to liquor, and whatever was coming my way, I just had to face the music. But I couldn't split with booze anymore. So I had actually taken the first 2 steps in this program and didn't know it. But how do you turn your wheel in life over to care of God as your understanding? What's a spiritual experience in these rooms? That happened to me moments later the same evening. As I stood all alone and afraid, this guy came up to me. I never saw him before. And he came over and put his arm around me and said, Johnny, don't worry, everything is going to be all right. And I believed him. And that's how it began for me with higher power. It was just those guys had my welfare taught, and I just trusted them. For quite a while, those same guys actually gave me the courage to face my wrongs and my difficulties. And they talked to me in a fashion I'd never experienced before because they didn't point fingers and there was no judgment. They just shared their own experiences from heart to heart. And this love and this care that goes on in these rooms is really the most healing commodity that we can offer or being offered. It shoots us back to good health, and it gives us a God of our very own that we can trust under any condition. It's here for everybody. Nobody's excluded. I actually envy all you who are new what you're going to find out about yourself, providing you go to meetings. I just envy you what you're going to find out about yourself. And you don't believe me now, and I didn't believe it then, but it was actually the greatest opportunity I ever had in my life when I was beaten down to nothing, so don't fret, we have all been there. You sit on an opportunity if you throw in the towel and let us love you and help you here. It's a trip and a half here. Karen didn't believe I was going to stay sober when I came in. It took 2 years of sobriety before she realized I meant business. Thank you, that's fine. You know, we come in and we want them to believe us, you know. But for that reason, another. I understood, too. She didn't dare to believe I was going to stay sober. Because every time we kissed and made up before, I always went back to drinking again. And you see, when it comes to trust, it's nothing we can demand. It's something we have to earn, and that's what the day at a time is all about. And besides that, there's just a lot of stuff that's going on between you and me in these rooms. I mean, we come in here and say, you're doing just fine, just hang in there, it's going to get better. And we have this whole support group here. We don't have to go through nothing alone anymore, you know. It's a beautiful thing here. And then my sponsor come, I had about 60 days of sobriety. He said, you know, sobriety got to be the number one in your life. I said, no, my kids are first. I love them all in my own life. And Charlie said, without sobriety, you won't have them. And you have a letter in your pocket to prove it, which was true because I was kicked out at the time. I said, well, then my business. I got to pay them bills. He said, John, you drank up a door factory. You're 36 grand in the hole. If you don't stay sober, you're going to blow this deal too. And every yes but I came up with, he plugged it. And I realized it's true. Without sobriety, we don't have a chance at all. And then he says that there's no conditions on sobriety. I said, what do you mean no conditions? I mean, if she could forgive me, my job goes a little better, I could consider this thing. He said, there's no conditions on sobriety. One of the conditions you set up might not come true. And then you blame AA for it and go out and drink again. And for one reason or another, I bought the package. So now sobriety is the number one in my life. There's no condition on sobriety, and then something spiritual happens to us here. Because I tell you how it was in my house at that time. You know, I am up early and I'm late to go out and work, and she saw me coming up there in the morning around 7 o'clock and said, before you had a boost as a crutch, now you have those damn meetings. Are you that kind of a weakling who can't stand on your own 2 feet? And I said, I suppose so. And then I go out to work all day. And then I come home now at 5 o'clock, a little after 5, and have dinner. There's 25 phone calls about all the people I owe the money to. And I was absolutely paranoid of it. I mean, there was no way that I could start to pay them back. And it was so much money, you know, and I was just scared to death about that, all those calls that I was to. So I had a quick bite to eat, and I run to a meeting, and I have a reprieve here for an hour and a half. And then I come home at 11 o'clock. I'm supposed to thank God for my sobriety that day. I said, God, what a terrible day I've had. What an absolutely terrifying day I've had. I said, yeah, but I didn't drink. I said, what's going on? I used to get drunk over a lot less. And then it begins. Because then we start to realize that this thing called sobriety, it's mine. It's my own. It's the only decent thing that has happened to me in a long time. It must be some sort of a gift or something. And then there starts to be a consistency in our living, and then we add to it. And then everything is God's business, good and bad. If He is part of the bad stuff must just be a period within a period. And when we have gone through that period, we realize why we had to go through it, and it all starts to make sense to us. You know, so this thing here with the sobriety itself, it's a gift of God as far as I'm concerned. Many people say, well, when will my ship come in? This is the ship. This is the big deal for an alcoholic. Not drink a day at a time. And then you see, so this thing here, sobriety, it's a gift of God. But the admission and the acceptance of it is part of that gift. It says in chapter 3 we have to concede to our innermost self we are alcoholic. That's the first step of recovery. The admission and the acceptance that we really are alcoholic. It's part of that sobriety deal. Those three things, as far as I'm concerned, the sobriety itself, the admission and the acceptance that I really am an alcoholic. It's a divine intervention, because 9 out of 10 alcoholics never make it because they don't buy what I'm talking about. 9 out of 10 alcoholics either die or go crazy from this illness because they don't buy what I'm talking about. 9 out of 10 alcoholics have periods of sobriety. They go in and out of treatment centers, in and out of care units, in and out of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous because they don't buy what I'm talking about. It's a fact. It's a tragedy. And then we come in now today, there are so many people as addicts, alcoholics. What's the difference? A person on heroin doesn't identify with people on coke. The coke feels superior to alcoholics for one reason or another. Maybe the price tag has a little snob appeal, I don't know. And they say, well, if we had a program like Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, we could do something about it. Narcotics Anonymous, Coke Anonymous have tremendous consistency and success today. A lot of success stories. But what's wrong with us? 9 out of 10 of us don't make it. What is our deal? It's like Clancy says, my case is different. You know, that's what's going on here. And I mean, and you see, so what I'm talking about here, that most of us, I'm not really like them, you know. And you know, and that's the tragedy of this illness. And you see, so when I realized, I saw it, and I understood it, that this thing of sobriety, it's really, I realized this is the whole thing here. And you know, I tell you, at that time in my life, I felt special. I really felt special. I felt like I was a God's kid. We all are God's kids. But you know that it was like a moment of clarity. Why was I so lucky that I saw this and grabbed it and ran with it? Why didn't my brothers, the way I tried to help them? How many people have you and I 12-stepped over the years that don't want what we have? What the hell is, you know? So this thing that you and I have, this thing called sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a marvelous thing. It really is. So that time in my life, I tell you, I was so tremendously grateful. And I tell you, in 32 years, it has never left me, because my priorities are the same. I understand it is just as vibrant today as it was that time 32 years ago when I realized that this is the big deal. And you see, you and I, we stay sober all day at a time. Let us say this. Now, my sobriety is right. My AA life is wonderful. My work starts to go better. The kids come home after the school and say, "Hi, Dad, can we talk?" Now, they are in place. And you know, every day there is something we see that our life is getting better in sobriety. And in my case, I've gone through a lot in sobriety. And many times in my day, the only thing that was right in my life was that I didn't drink that day. And you know, it's a big deal. And it's worthwhile to fight for sobriety. So even when it thinks like everything is unfair, hang in there. It's going to get better after that. And you will have clarities after that. And it's fantastic. Now, so now, 2 years later, Karen comes and says, "JohnA, it wasn't always your fault." I said, "Now I can die." You know? You know, now she is in place, you know. And, you know, and you know, I just had to throw that at you, you know, because I wanted to say, that's been a little serious here for a moment. You know, long ago, Karen says to me that this life we live today is just the most fabulous adventure. It was so hopeless at one time, it's completely turned around. There's even a degree of innocence between today. And that's almost impossible to believe. But that has come to pass because she is just as busy in Al-Anon as I'm in AA. And we have seen so many people over the years have turned around and start to be good to one another. Nothing is in vain. All that bad stuff is going to benefit somebody else down the line, so don't worry about it. And sometimes we wonder, what profound amends can I make to the loved one to straighten everything out? You know, there's no profundity here. It doesn't matter what intentions we have, what promises, what gifts. We can't bribe them no more. Doesn't matter how many good things you and I do. When we come home drunk, it's all canceled out. It means nothing. The only amends we can make to ourselves and our loved ones is to stay off the booze a day at a time. The rest of the program will follow little by little, but we got to start somewhere. Yeah. And that's how it is. It's a beautiful thing. I went to 7 meetings a week the first year I was sober. I've gone to 5 meetings a week ever since. It's a lot of meetings. I'm up 6:30, 6:45 every morning. I work very hard. It's a privilege as far as I'm concerned. And many people say, "Jesus, what a schedule that guy got." You know, I live more normal than normal people do. The only difference, I'm aware of it. You know, the last 4 years I drank, I swear to God, I worked 7 days a week, 16, 18 hours a day, to deliver something so I could invoice something so I could collect enough money to buy enough booze and codeine to live a day at a time. It's a full-time job to stay drunk. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, my kids were 13, 10, and 8, and 6. With the schedule I've had in Alcoholics Anonymous in my work, I was able to play tennis with them twice a week while they grew up. I taught them how to ride that horse I fell off. They had him for 10 years. I relived my youth with those kids. It's a beautiful thing. I've experienced everything with them that I wish my father could have experienced with me. And it's just like I've sensed his presence here all along in this life in Alcoholics Anonymous. There is no void or no emptiness in here anymore. It's just a different kind of communication. It has all been filled up thanks to you guys and what you have shown me here. You know, well, it's 9. I probably will talk for another 15 minutes. I have to talk about the program a little bit. You know, they paid a lot of money to get me here. You know, I want to give you a little hope before we sit down here. The first stumbling block we have in this program is the inventory. I had such a bad attitude, I said, you know, it won't change anything at all. And my sponsor said, if you don't take your inventory, you ain't going to stay sober. So I would say, I'm going to prove to him it doesn't make a bit of difference. So I had that bad attitude, and I took my inventory, and then I read it to him. And the funny thing was, after I had done that, it was just like I'd sensed that I had fulfilled the contract for sobriety. I didn't have to worry about getting drunk anymore. I also had the deepest feeling that God had forgiven me. It's an incredible thing. I could also, through my inventory, see that I had a repetition in my life in the same areas throughout my life. When I was 13, 14, 17, 18, 21, 22, 30, in the same areas throughout my life, I had the same problems, and I realized that these are my defects of character and shortcomings. And I went down on my knees and said, God, I've denied all my life that I am like this. But I realized through my own willpower and technique I can do nothing about it. And after I give them to you, and you can remove them on your time and your terms. And you know that I hear sometimes people say, I'm going to go home and work on my defects of character today. It's the same as with booze. The more we work on it, the worse it's going to get. All these things is God's business. There is no such thing as intellectual solution to an obsession. There got to be God involved in this. And I could even see that Karen had problems in certain areas of her life, and I realized if I should use logic and common sense and point it out to her, she was even going to get sicker instead of better, because she would have to defend it even more so. So I just left it alone. I surrendered there. And the funny thing about this, a few months on this, when I didn't react to it, her fear about these things lessened, and she didn't have to defend herself about it. And then she went to her sponsor and said, why do I do these things? And then she got peace and a way to go, you know. No two people surrender at the same time, you know. And thank God for the AA and Al-Anon program and the other things, how important it is. Now, so you who sit down and argue with yourself whether you should take the inventory or not, I give you a little break. There's a long form and a short form. First, write down the 4 things you have decided not to tell anybody, even of severe torture. It will save you 62 pages of writing, you know. You got to get to it sooner or later, you know. So, it's so humiliating, you know. Now, the last big obstacle we have is the resentments. That is the worst we have to deal with, the resentments. And I had an unbelievable resentment against my older brother. He was the cause of all my difficulties when I grew up. He hated me with a passion I didn't understand why. You know, he was only 2 years older than I, 1 year and 9 months older than I was. But he was 12 years old. He was 6'2", weighed over 200 pounds. And he used to punch me out, and I rolled under the dining room table and pretended I had fainted so he wouldn't hit me anymore. He hated me. And he had a photographic mind. He was brilliant. And he used to ridicule me how stupid I was and all that stuff, you know. And when he became a water polo player, he was in the Olympics. And when I was 13 years old, I was out in the ocean, and there was 15 feet depth, and he drowned me. And it's a terrifying thing to drown. You know, I even heard my father's voice talking to me the other side when I couldn't inhale anymore, you know. It's a terrifying thing. And when I came to, he had racked me up on the sun deck, and I lay down. I wonder, why does he hate me so much? And all kinds of other things. But I just want to tell you, I had a justified resentment. Then I sit here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm supposed to deal with my resentment. I said, how can I forgive him after all he has done to me? And I tried a serenity prayer, and I felt like a hypocrite. I got to be something more to it than this. And I said, please give me a break, help me. And then one guy, he says that, try to understand your resentment. And the funny thing was, I turned it around. I said, why did he hate me? And it was just like I saw a film. You know, when we were little, our father favored me. When I was 3 years old, I was absolutely adorable. My father used to lift me up in the air and hug me and kiss me, you know. And my brother was obese, and he was not the lap baby. And he stood on the side. I could still see his eyes burning. What about me, you know? But he was not something you could lift up real easy because he was already so big then. And I realized this is the whole deal. And then I realized what my brother actually had done with his life. He had one obsession in his life, and it was to get the approval from our father. And he couldn't get it because he died when he was 9. And you know, that guy, when he came into junior high school, took gymnastics 7 days a week. He became one of the finest athletes in Sweden. You know, he was in gymnastics and water polo. He was an officer and a gentleman. He carried a Swedish flag 3 times in the Olympics. You know, he was a fantastic guy. At the time, he lived outside Stockholm in a castle, and he was tremendous there. He lived in the same circumstances as my father lived when he grew up, you know. And, you know, and I sat there, my God, he has lived all his life just trying to get this approval from our father, and he can't get it because he died so soon. And I thought, how can I straighten this thing out? You know, tell me if this is a coincidence. At that time of my life, I hadn't heard from him for 15 years. The next day I received a letter from him, and everything I'd been thinking about the night before, what he had done to achieve, to glorify our Father's name, he had all written it down, bit for bit for bit for bit, what I had been thinking about last night. And I said, my God, here he is, 40-some years old, and still trying to get the approval from our Father. So I just sat down and I wrote this little note. I said, dear Bertha, if our Father had been alive today, he would have taken you in his arms and said, you have succeeded beyond my greatest expectations, your loving brother John. I haven't had a resentment since. But I tell you what the payoff was on this. I lost my inferiority complex. You know, it's an incredible thing that happens to us when we are forced and motivated to surrender. You know, and I tell you, I didn't do this with my older brother because I'm a loving and wonderful guy. I was so full of pain and hate over this thing that it just burned me up inside. And due to the fact that I was forced to sit down and understand that it all clarified. You know, it's an incredible thing what you and I learn after we have been here for a while. And you know, if nothing else happens here, you know, with longevity on the program, we can be understanding to other human beings. You know, I was such an, you know, if I wasn't the center of attention all my life, it was no good, I wouldn't even play. And here you and I, we have this wonderful opportunity to help somebody else down the line here. It's a fantastic thing to get out of our own self-obsessed personalities, you know. Okay, now I'm going to try to stop. You know, it drives the old-timers crazy when you go overtime in an AA meeting. I have a friend in Glendale, his name is Bob Lemke, and he's a full-blooded German. And I had a little problem with the Germans during the war, you know. You know. And I knew Bob for 4 years, and I realized I loved him. He's a great AA, he helps a lot of people. And the last 16 years or 17 years, he has invited me to Glendale to talk on his birthday. But he's one of those staunch old-timers that you don't save any souls after 10, buddy, you know, that type, you know. And by the way, he talks funny. You know, he was actually born, he has more of an accent than I have. I must practice every night or something, you know. Mind you, he invites me up there. But he's one of those staunch old guys that don't save any souls after 10. It was 10 o'clock. And I had a minute and a half to wrap up my story. And he sits back down and shouts, John, for God's sake, it's 10. I said, Lemke, this is only an AA meeting. We ain't marching into Poland tonight, you know. So, you know, the 12 steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, that's the recovery program. But it takes a while before it falls in place. And I'll share this little episode with you, how important the group and the fellowship is in that meantime, because it takes a while before it falls in place. I love to say to you that I love in the beginning the book where it says, alcoholism is a symptom of something deeper-seated emotional. It sure covers me. I love in the beginning the book where it says, God as I understand Him. It must be the most spiritual line that has ever been written on the face of this earth. Think about something is written that doesn't interfere in anybody's religion. It's a beautiful thing. I love in the beginning the book where it says, we are 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. What a promise. But again, it takes a while before the steps fall in place. And then it's this little episode how important the group is. I had another friend that came in. His name was Bill Schellenberger. He was a framing contractor. We became the dearest friends. And he was framing 110 houses for a gentleman developer out my way. His name was Alva Wilson. He was 72 years old. He built about 1,000 homes a year. But Bill was framing these 110 houses for Mr. Wilson. It was in July, and it was 84 degrees hot. And I came out the Friday afternoon to see what my guys were doing. And he's up down the second floor nailing on the roof rafters. And he was a good-looking guy. He looks much like you. He was 6'2", you know, and a red handkerchief around his forehead, you know, and no T-shirt, you know, and shorts on, a big belt, a big hammer, 30-foot tape, and construction boots. Looked pretty match up there when he was swinging a hammer, you know. But he saw me coming down the street. And just then Mr. Wilson came in there with 6 vice presidents down the cul-de-sac to look the project over. But the 3-piece suit's really neat, you know. But he saw me coming down the street. He stood up there on the roof and he said, John! And he took one step off the roof and bounced right down on the ground and came up like nothing and threw himself around me and kissed me twice. You know, here we are, 2 big guys in a construction job, you know. Wow. You know, oh boy, Layla. And we stood down and hugged each other, you know. And Mr. Wilson stood down and looked at us, you know. And he said, what's going on with you guys? You know. And Bill said, oh, Mr. Wilson, old John and I went through Alcatraz together. Yeah, but he knew better. He stood down and looked at us, and he was very serious. In fact, he had tears in his eyes. He said, no, I don't think so. But whatever it is, it's beautiful. And that's what's going on here between you and me. You know, Chuck Chamberlain, all the years that he went to meetings, he was trying to show us what's going on in these rooms. It's called love with no conditions. Love with no conditions. You and I can be who we are and what we are, and in spite of it, we are loved. There is nothing like it on the face of this earth. And then this ism we have. It makes us belong. We belong to each other. There is a sense of belonging in these rooms that is haunting. It's a fact and reality. Alone we cannot do it. Put together we can. The room, the group, the fellowship will carry us when we can't care for ourselves. It's a beautiful thing that goes on in these rooms. And I like to interject one more thing, then I'm going to finish. Our youngest daughter, Katrina, has the same personality as I have. Desperate need for approval, never feeling that she was enough, and contemplated suicide when she was in her teens, 13 years and up. And in July this year, she had 10 years of sobriety, and she's beautiful and free. And our son, he was hooked on drugs and pot for 4 years when he went to Laguna Beach High School. 1st of May this year is 15 years ago that he got off that thing. And we are so grateful, you know, that, and it's hard for us parents when the kids get in trouble, you know. But I never had to give them ultimatums that involved total addiction. I always left the door open. And thank God for what you taught me here. It was a big deal for me when I was right and didn't have to say nothing. It was even a bigger deal when I could give everybody else the right to be wrong and I didn't have to interfere in God's timetable. It's a beautiful thing what you taught me here. And lastly, I like to say to you, when I was 13 years old, I used to sit and look out over the ocean in Sweden. And I had intentions and anticipations and dreams. I'm 73 years old now. And I look out over the ocean in Laguna Beach every day. And I have intentions and anticipations and dreams. And I'm extremely vulnerable. And I thank God every day for that sensitiveness that you and I have. That sensitiveness that I used to curse. Why am I different? Why do I overfeel in all directions? What the hell is the matter with me? That sensitiveness, when we practice the principles of the program, will be a blessing, because it will function like a thermostat, and it will motivate us to take the action that's laid out in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. The action we take sets us free. Chuck used to say, you can't think yourself into good living. You have to live yourself into good thinking. It's the action we take that sets us free. But Chuck said another thing. He said, life is tough, and life deals us blows. And sometimes even with longevity in the program, we get into the negative, and we get in even into the fears. And that has to do with the distance from God we are. But he said, self is involved here. It's actually a conscious separation from God. And conscious implies that I have something to do about that. And there again, the action we take sets us free. You all knew, if you can just believe this, that we only wish you well, and we only want good things for you. If you can just believe that and take that with you, you will never wake up lonely anymore, because you know by now there is a way to go and to live. I cannot for a moment believe that God would take us through all these things and then bring us in here and show us this way to live if He didn't have any plans for us. It really wouldn't make any sense at all. So you all knew, do this. Do what we do. Don't drink and come to meetings. It's the best deal in town. Thank you.